Thank you for coming in this cold weather.
You don't want to invite the group from out the whole
Kiddush Club. So a reminder that we're going to have, God willing, another lecture next week. And it's same place, same time. Next week it is sponsored by Rivka Karp, Oren Karp, and Eris Karp in memory of their husband and father, Mr. Azriel Karp. That's for next week. Tonight we're going to have a lecture. It's entitled Doctors, Rabbis, and the Living Will. It is sponsored by Dr. Andrea Stern and Isaac Singer. It is to commemorate the yahrzeit of Andrea's mother, Esther Leika Bat Yael, Esther Lillian Stern. So we do thank you for the sponsorship, and may the neshama. When's the actual yahrzeit? Yud Ches Shvat. So may the neshama benefit from the Divrei Torah, and perhaps from the little bit or something that we actually learn here tonight. Now, this was a little bit of a, for me personally, it was a little bit of a challenging lecture, and one that I'm not walking in with this excitement that I would usually have in giving a talk, because I think it's important. In other words, sometimes you are driven into a specific topic by interest. Other times you are driven into it because you sense that there is importance in it. And when you walk in with importance, you feel more of a responsibility due to its significance. And at times you need to regenerate yourself, especially if it's a difficult one. Now, there's another reason that it's difficult for me, because I do enjoy getting up and sharing with you halachic issues, and what the halachic authorities know, or what opinions we follow. And I do very much want that you go home, or you go on your trip, or you go into your coffee shop, or into your wine shop, and follow whatever you did or did not hear. In this case, I'm going to start off with mentioning the following. About 25 years ago, there was a very unfortunate case in Tel Aviv. A patient with ALS, obviously his conditions were deteriorating, and he makes a request that if indeed he reaches a point that he can no longer breathe on his own, he doesn't want to be intubated, he doesn't want to be hooked up to any ventilator, any piece of equipment, he wants to die in peace. The issue was brought to the great rabbinic authorities, and the actual responsa, the actual tshuva, was recorded by Rav Lau, Rabbi Israel Meir Lau, who at the time was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. He is again the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, and in between he was actually at some point the chief rabbi of Israel. So Rabbi Lau notes that you should know, I will give my psak, meaning I will guide the hospital, the family, the patient, how to deal with this situation. But let me make it very clear that it is forbidden under any circumstance to infer from my ruling a precedent to treat another patient. Meaning every single case is different. There could be details that change the complete picture. So do not go ahead and use my ruling as a trailblazer, but rather understand that it's a very specific one. Even if the cases appear to be as similar as two drops of water. It's obviously a translation from Hebrew, when they say that two people look like two tipot, shte tipot, mayim. Now, what Rabbi Lau was telling the public, what he's telling me and what he's telling us, is the understanding that this is a very sensitive issue. It is indeed life and death. And there are many details. It could vary, and it could depend on so many different things to take into consideration that you have to be, and I have to be very careful, and we have to be aware of the fact that we have to ask on every single case. Okay? Just keep that information in mind. Now, I'll start off with a statement that appears in the Jerusalem Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud talks about a situation where a person gets ill on the Shabbat. The Shabbat, the person feels ill, and it appears to be a life-threatening situation. So we are told that if a person is shoel, if a person before he actually deals with the issue, if a person in shul is not feeling well, so the person who goes ahead and before treating or assisting the patient in a manner that would violate the Shabbat, if a person asks a shaila before running to take care of him, harei ze meguneh, this is awful. Don't go ahead and start asking shailas if it's a life-threatening where every single minute or every single second counts. Okay, don't start asking shailas. You have any doubt at all, you go ahead, run to the telephone, run to the yellow pouch we have in back here. Go ahead and do what you have to do. Don't ask shailas. That's what the Yerushalmi tells us. The Yerushalmi adds that hanishal, if there is a rabbi who is asked, that is meguneh, that is inappropriate. There's a flaw there. If the rabbi is asked, that indicates a flaw in the rabbi. Why? So the commentators explain, if the rabbi did not educate the community that if there's a situation of pikuach nefesh, you just run and don't ask questions, do what you have to do to save a life, it means that the rabbi is not doing a good job. So if he is asked, he obviously did not fulfill his responsibility. Now, then the Yerushalmi adds, and this is a general statement that deals with all cholim, with all situations that are challenging. The Yerushalmi tells us that you should know, the kol sheken, the worst thing the person could do when dealing with a situation of ailment, of illness, is if the person is mityaesh ve'eino oseh. The word mityaesh means if he loses hope and therefore decides he is not going to do anything. He works with statistics and he says, statistically, if a person has such a ailment, such a stroke, such a heart attack, statistically the guy's not going to survive. So let's leave it as it is. Let's not violate the Shabbat or during the week not bother ourselves. So the Jerusalem Talmud tells us that this is terrible. It is something that is very problematic to lose hope. And this is a very general statement when we deal with all illnesses. And it's interesting. Imagine the following scenario. A person visits someone else in the hospital. Prognosis is not good. Doctors seem to indicate that there are many, many complications. So what Jerusalem Talmud tells us, obviously, we should not be mityaesh. Don't lose hope. If you're a doctor, continue putting an effort to try to figure out how to bring this person back to health. If you are not a doctor, there's something called tefillah. Go ahead, and after you visit him, it could be a very difficult situation. It could be one that statistically the individual is not going to survive. Nevertheless, don't be mityaesh. Pull out a tehillim. In front of him, you could go ahead and say you should have a refuah shalayma. And if you are in front of him, you don't have to mention his name. You could just say that the Rabbanu Shalom should send you a refuah. If you are not in front of the individual, you could go ahead and say his or her name and ask the Rabbanu Shalom to bring a refuah. Do not be mityaesh. And imagine a situation of someone visiting such a case in the hospital. They walk out and they say, he's never going to survive. And on the way, they see a lottery booth. And as you all know, the lottery, now the Powerball, during these crucial moments, someone's going to walk away with a few $1 billion and have a lousy life from this point on, because his financial worries will come to an end. But believe me, guarantee, he's going to have other worries that are much, much worse, right? And we're going to go ahead and track that individual. There's going to be updates, and there will be a book about the person eventually. The fall of, John Doe, who lives somewhere in Kansas, who actually brought the ticket, was happy and got a lot of friends. But think how ironic it is. When you're dealing with a patient where there is a 1 in 1,000 chance that he survives, you say there's no hope. When you walk by the lottery booth and there's a chance of 1 in 200 million, that you do buy. Why? Obviously, the chances of winning $1 billion is so great that you are willing to go ahead and take your chance. So you should have the same attitude towards the Chola. You should value every single person's life. You should value the life of this person that you just visited. And it should be so valuable to you that even if the odds are against him surviving or her survival, you should go ahead and pray, just as you buy the lottery ticket. So that's what we are told. Yush has no place. Do not lose hope. Difficult statement, by the way, for any of us who have dealt with such situations. We know very well that the challenges are great, but that's what our tradition teaches. Reason behind it. The reason behind the fact that we value every single person is simply because we value every life, and we also value every single minute and every single second of life. There's a magnificent medrash that tells us that the words Kol HaNeshama Tehalelka, that every single neshama, every single soul should go ahead and praise the Almighty. Comes Rabbi Levi in the name of Rab Chanina, and he says, Al kol neshima v'neshima, on every single breath that you take, she'adam noshem, tzarich lekales, you have to praise laboreh. You take a breath, right? By the way, when you meditate, that's what you do. You breathe. You needed it. You needed the oxygen. You're thankful for the Ribono Shel Olam for creating the oxygen. On every single neshima, a person should be thankful to the Ribono Shel Olam. Shene'emar kol haneshama tehalelka. The word neshama, soul, is the exact same word as neshima, breath. Every single breath of every single human being, and how much more so every single breath of a Jewish person, is one that is valuable. So, life is valuable. Every breath is valuable. If we are mindful and we can take a breath and appreciate the gift of life, that's wonderful. If we take a breath and we don't appreciate the gift of life, it's still valuable. But as a result, there's an understanding in Judaism that life is valuable. And when society talks about the quality of life, which has its place, we in Judaism have to remind ourselves and the world that there's something called the value of life. Life is valuable. Right? Living is an accomplishment. Taking a breath is an accomplishment. So therefore, as a result, in any condition a person is, life should be valued. Do whatever you can to cure a person. And what it would seem is that just as we value life and we value every breath, so on the surface, if you could extend a life, if you have the ability to extend a life, on the surface, that should become a goal on the surface. Because if rabbinic sources indicate that there is indeed achievement with every single breath taken by a person, it is valuable. There is an achievement. It is the desire of God. And just as we all understand that mitzvot are valuable, so too neshima is valuable. So on this surface, we should try to extend every life to have more breaths. That would be the, I would call, conventional wisdom of the Jewish approach to the end of life, that try to extend it. Every moment is valuable. That would be conventional approach. However, listen to this rabbinic statement. There are 3 individuals who were exiled from Jerusalem during the period of the destruction of the first temple, and they land up in Babylonia. They land up and they are serving King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar eventually builds some kind of statue and wants them to bow to it. These individuals by the name of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, what do they say? We're not going to bow. They are thrown into a furnace, a miracle occurs, and they survive. They become the symbol of Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify the name of God, that if there is something you believe in, you are willing to give your life for it. Come the rabbis in the Talmud. And the rabbis tell us, listen, there is no question. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are a great inspiration for eternity. For many, many Jews throughout the ages, they were mindful of the concept of Kiddush Hashem and what Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were willing to do to sanctify the name of God. There's actually a last name among Sephardim by the name Chamu. Ben Chamu is the last name. And one of the explanations given is that they are Ben, Hananiah, Mishael, ve'Azariah, Chamu. Just indicates their significance. Come the rabbis in the Talmud and they say, listen, they deserve the credit. They were willing to give their life. However, ilmale nigdua, if, on the other hand, King Nebuchadnezzar would have made a decree that instead of throwing them into the furnace, they would be lashed, tortured. If they would be tortured, guess what? Palchu latzalma, they would have worshipped that image. If a person is willing to give his life, that's incredible, Kiddush Hashem. Is there an expectation a person should give their life al Kiddush Hashem? Well, it seems to be yes, if they are inspiring us. But the rabbis note that you should know, a human being is able to give his life for a cause. To go through torture, to suffer, when there's pain and agony, suffering, the Almighty does not expect anyone to go through that. We're not capable. And even these heroes become the symbol of Kiddush Hashem. They would have worshipped the image of Nebuchadnezzar. Very, very powerful statement. Telling us, teaching us, that when it comes to Yisurim, when it comes to pain management, when it comes to the agony of suffering, which again, unfortunately, some of us have seen it in illness, right? Palliative care, right? We know, I know myself that this is something that it is unimaginable what people have to go through with doctors and with medicine. Pain is indeed very, very significant. It is so significant that the rabbis can have, quote unquote, the chutzpah to go ahead and declare that these heroes of the people of Israel, to give their life they could have. Pain, they would have given in. That's what the rabbis are saying. But why are they saying this? They want us to learn that we should recognize what pain is about. It's interesting. This is off the record, so don't tell anyone. That last week there was a meeting at the COR among some of the rabbis that dealt with medical marijuana. Works as follows. The OU gave certification to it. Right? Fine. Other kosher agencies are concerned that if people see medical marijuana, they will forget about the medical part, focus on the marijuana part, and say, aha, the rabbis are giving a kosher stamp on weed. Right? People are going to be walking around, I'm smoking under hashgacha. So there is a concern, right? There's a very serious concern there. So therefore, what they were dealing with at the COR meeting was, should we go ahead and do so or not? Fine. So the decision was basically, listen, let's not get involved in it. Medical marijuana really probably does not need hashgacha if someone is in a situation that they need it. I personally felt, and it could be due to the fact that I've seen people suffering, that if you could go ahead and place another item on the shelf that will assist someone in dealing with pain, and it does, by the way, I've heard this from oncologists, that they've told patients, if you could go ahead and figure out, if you know the right street corner to get a joint, go ahead and do it. Why? Pain is something that is overwhelming. Let's give whatever tools are available, and if it assists one person, mission accomplished. Pain is quite significant in our tradition. So now, let's try to deal here with the two pieces of information that we have. Life is valuable. Every breath is significant. You are sitting somewhere and you're waiting, and it's not outside freezing cold Toronto, and you could take a breath and enjoy the air, the oxygen. Praise the Creator. Kol HaNeshama. Think about the verse. Kol HaNeshama Tehaloka. Praise the Almighty. It's an incredible gift. You can meditate, you can achieve, and you can utilize every moment by taking a breath. And as a result, even if there's a patient who is in a coma, there's a breath being taken there, there is actually something achieved. It's the will of God. God, we don't have any understanding at all about our existence. If you think about world history, the world's been around for thousands of years. We come to this world. We're lucky if we live 120. It's not a very, very long time in the big picture. Why did the Almighty create this world? I have no idea. Right? There are a lot of philosophical questions we have to ask. But it is the will of God that people live. So by living and by functioning and being productive, and of course for us by being mindful of our tradition and doing mitzvot, we are accomplishing something. Guess what? Accomplishment does not end if a person is in a bed or in a wheelchair. Accomplishment continues. And a person can be in a coma. There is accomplishment there. Do I understand why? No, but I don't understand anything about life anyway. So it just fits into the big picture. There is something achieved. So therefore, on the one hand, it would seem that if you are dealing with a patient who is suffering from cancer, and you have a situation where you could go ahead and extend the person's life for a week by hooking them up to some kind of piece of equipment, or giving them chemotherapy, or dialysis. Logically, you would say the question should be asked, will this extend the life? And the answer will be yes. Logically, every breath is an achievement. Obviously, you extend the life. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, pain is real. And to extend a life in pain, right? It is a life. We're not denying that. Yes, there's no value there. People around us are not going to go ahead and consider it a life where there is comfort. They're not going to call it quality of life, but it is life after all. What do you do? Okay, so listen to the shaila you have to deal with. The ALS patient, the patient with cancer. Okay, the systems are, one of the systems, kidneys are going down. Do you go ahead and put the person on dialysis or not? Doctor claims you put him on dialysis, you get 2 extra weeks. The patient says, I'm suffering, I'm in pain, right? I can't move from one side from the bed to the other, right? The cancer's in the bones already. Which one do I do? Life? Pain? How do we deal with the shilas? That's the reason that this is a very complex issue, okay? And we have to be mindful of the significance of what we are dealing here. Now, the key answer to understand how we even begin the discussion is a statement made by the Ramah. Ramah, 16th century, shares with us a statement that was at the time 200 years old. And the rabbis share with us the following. They share with us the following. Imagine you have a patient who's dying in bed at home. Next door, there is someone chopping wood. Now, this is not like today someone chopping wood would work 15 minutes, right? Surf the internet for another 10 minutes, go out for a coffee break, and then come back for another 15 minutes. This is in the olden days. So the person is chopping wood for 12 hours straight. The people around the dying patient realize that the reason this soul has not departed yet is because every single time it wants to enter into a semi-conscious state, it gets a little clap that's keeping it alive. The clap, the wood chopper comes. So what do? So notes the Ramah, listen carefully. Im yesh davar shegorem ikuv yetziat hanefesh. If there is something external that is preventing the soul from departing, kegon, for example, sheyesh samuch, that next to the house where the patient is laying, there is a kol dofek of a chotev etzim, and that is preventing the person of dying. There's discomfort there. He's dying. He's in pain. You could extend the life here, right? So what would you say? Well, perhaps if every moment is valuable, go ahead and hire a few more people to be Chotev Etzim, get official, hire the clappers, right? Comes the Ramo and tells us, Mutar lahasiro misham, you are allowed to tell the wood chopper, stop, let the guy die in peace, is what the Ramo says. Now, we all agree that you're not allowed to go ahead and take a pillow and smush, the patient's face and put an end to his breathing, even if he is suffering. Right? Euthanasia is not something that is permissible according to Jewish law, even if someone is suffering. Physician-assisted suicide is prohibited according to Jewish law, even if the person is suffering. But here, the Rama comes and tells us it is fine, and perhaps even the right thing to do. What's the difference between the two? So the difference is, there's a chiluk in rabbinic language, a chiluk between what we call withholding something, where you are perhaps allowing the individual to die by not performing an act, and on the other hand, when you kill him, that is kum ve'eseh in rabbinic literature. You are actively ending his life. There is absolutely no case, and it makes absolutely no difference how much the individual is suffering. There is no scenario where it would be permissible for the physician to go ahead and end the individual's life. No such case. There are scenarios where you are allowed to withhold treatment when a person is suffering. And therefore the example of the cancer patient, where it started off in the colon and it's in the liver and it's spreading into the bone and the person is suffering and he's in agony and the individual couldn't move from side to side in his bed, right? You have to get a whole team to move him from the right to the left. If you would have a way of extending their life, such the individual's life in suffering, meaning if you could go ahead and order some kind of chemotherapy and bring it to him and as a result extend his life, no such requirement, because you are allowed to withhold. It is permissible. Okay? That is what we are told. On the other hand, to withdraw a patient from something that is sustaining him, withdraw him, that would be far more problematic. And the example I'm dealing with is when you have a person who comes into a hospital, has difficult breathing, they hook him up to a ventilator, he's intubated, and then they realize that the systems are shutting down, and the only thing that is keeping the heart pumping is the oxygen that are coming into the lungs. The oxygen are coming into the lungs, the heart is pumping. That already is a different ballgame, because if you would take him off the ventilator, right, that is not withholding something. You know what you are doing then? You are actually withdrawing him from that which is giving him life. That is already prohibited. So we have here, as you already sense, tremendous difficulties in identifying scenarios. What are they? Are you withholding or are you withdrawing? So here we enter into what the poskim note. Piece of information number one is, there is no need for extraordinary measures to keep someone alive. Now, the statement I am making now, not all rabbis agree with. Not all rabbis agree with. Not very long ago, here in Toronto, there was a rabbi in town who put out this little, what would be called the Halachic living will, his view of the Halachic living will, where it indicated that there would be an halachic requirement to extend a person's life in every single situation. Those were the words that were basically used. There was such a school. And that is the old thinking. There is the old thinking. I could share with you a case we dealt with in Memphis. A very sensitive case, and I'll leave out the details. But a younger man dying from cancer. We're in the hospital with him. It's a Sunday morning. I was there together with the rabbi, the other rabbi, one of the other rabbis in town in Memphis. Both of us younger rabbis. And there was a shiloh. The shiloh was the doctors come to us, the systems are shutting down, the kidneys are shutting down. We could theoretically hook him up on a ventilator. What do you rabbis say? Now, we're both younger rabbis in our 30s. He was the other rabbi was a real Torah scholar, but again, we were not comfortable on dealing with the issue on our own, so we called a senior rabbi. The senior rabbi at home says, halachically, according to Jewish law, what do? You try to extend a life in all situations. We get off the phone, that's not what we were looking for. That's not what we were expecting. And it's not what we were looking for. We both learned otherwise. And we didn't follow through with what we were told to do. Now, who did we rely on? Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein, who you could call the Posek of North America. He makes it very, very clear there is absolutely no requirement to go ahead and have extraordinary external factors brought into the picture. You do not have to give dialysis to extend the life of suffering. You do not have to put a person on a ventilator when the system is shutting down and he's in pain. You don't have to go, and the list is, of course, long, of things that are not required to give a patient. However, the poskim make it very, very clear that there are some things that you must give. And this is where we're going to go ahead and have a little bit of an issue with the medical ethics that you will find in society. According to Jewish law, there are things that you simply do not withhold. Number one, nutrition, hydration, and oxygen. Okay? In other words, if there is a patient in a dying state and the individual is in pain and the decision was made that we're going to put an end to treatments, if the person needs to be fed, you give them food. Now, what happens if they're no longer able to eat? Right? What about putting in an NG, an NG tube, or a tube that places the food directly in the stomach, a PEG tube? What about those? Those already, there's a little bit of a discussion because they are invasive. Is that considered natural or not? So there's a discussion there. And it could depend on the situation, and it could depend on what stage the individual is, we're dealing with the individual. But when it comes to oxygen and when it comes to nutrition, the general rule is it is something that you do not withhold. Next, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was a posek who lived in Eretz Yisrael, passed away about 20 years ago. He was of the opinion that basic medications like antibiotics should not be withheld. He was of the opinion that if you have a dying patient and there's some kind of secondary element that comes in and he has an infection, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was of the opinion that you must give the individual oral antibiotics as well. Reb Moshe Feinstein seems to indicate otherwise. Reb Moshe Feinstein seems to say that if the person is suffering and you're going to go ahead and extend their life by giving them this antibiotics, there is no such requirement. Not an easy thing to deal with. You have a dispute between great rabbinic authorities when we are dealing with life and death, right? Not easy at all, but this is something that's mentioned. Now, you are familiar with a DNR. Do not resuscitate. Is it permissible according to Jewish law to sign a DNR? That's the question. So number one, I've been told from doctors and from rabbis that you have to be very, very careful with the DNR because quite often DNR, if it's just handed to the healthcare professionals, it might be seen as a family that is basically declaring, just take care, finish them up and move on. There's a danger there. On the other hand, halachically speaking, a DNR is, according to Ramosha Feinstein, 100% permissible. And therefore recommended, what would be recommended is to have it signed, but keep it in a back pocket. As we'll see soon, those who are involved in making the decisions should not present it immediately. You know, you do hear stories of people in hospitals where they bring a picture of the person who was laying there in a bed, how they looked a few years ago. Because sometimes the staff needs a reminder that the person that looks like a skeleton was actually a person, was alive. And that's the sensitivity that you have to have when you walk into such a facility, to understand that you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with grandparents, you're dealing with parents, you're dealing with a brother, with a sister. They need that reminder. So DNR number one, halachically it is permissible to sign, but nevertheless, do be careful with it. Okay. Another question that it was dealt with over the past few decades among poskim has to do with, again, pain. And I talk about it. Seeing my father had a tremendous amount of pain the last few weeks of his life, right? He had, the cancer spread into the bone. They said it was earlier on sciatica, Nishkin sciatica. That was a nice way of hoping that it would. Obviously, it spread, and the pain, the agony was awful. It was awful. And if I could have gotten him at the time, if I would have had the right connections and get him something to smoke to assist him, of course I would have done it. What's the shayla? To assist him with the pain. So the question is, with the significance of pain, what about morphine? What's the concern with morphine? You give a little bit too much, what? It slows down the system, it shuts down the system. So the poskim deal with the shayla. Are you allowed to administer morphine when you know that there is a possibility that, now doctors will tell you exactly the amount that is permissible. My father, remember, had a pump that he would hold in his hand, press the button, get the right amount of morphine, and it had a control that if he does a little bit too much, it would put a hold on it. Morphine is 100% permissible, even if there is a possibility that the dosage will indeed shorten the person's life. If the intention of taking the morphine is to deal with pain, it is 100% permissible. So again, this is among the many issues that are dealt with. It's the complex issue. Before I want to get to the core, the living will, the healthcare proxy, but I think the most complex issue is the issue of a person that is already hooked up to a ventilator. And the systems are dying, and what remains here are lungs that are getting their oxygen from a machine, which in turn allows the heart to pump, but nothing else is functioning. Can you take the person off the ventilator? Now that is perhaps the most significant of all shaylas, and not easy to deal with. In theory, if there would be a way of determining that the person there's death, brain death of the stem, meaning not the upper part of the lobe, but the stem of the brain, which indicates that the person is no longer alive. If we would know for a fact that there's absolutely no activity in the brain stem, then it would be permissible to take him off the ventilator. Not so simple. I think the doctors here would tell me that there are ways of doing it. They put the flashlight to see if there's reflection from the pupils. There are ways of determining, but the halachic authorities deal with it and at the same time don't have anything conclusive. It's from the more complex areas, taking a person off a ventilator, something that has to be dealt with. Now, in any questions up until this point, because now we're going to move on a little bit to what the living do. Yes?
How about intravenous? The same as you?
Intravenous itself would fit into the category of nutrition that in most cases you do give. You do give it. Ramosha Feinstein notes that if you have a patient who is dying and simply doesn't want to eat and doesn't want intravenous and yanks it out, you do not have to tie him down to feed them or to put intravenous in. However, this is a statement that we have to be very careful with, because I know someone, it was in Chile, a person who had a stroke. We were visiting him in the hospital, and he was pulling out one of the tubes. I think it was NG tube that he was pulling out. They had to tie him down to do so, but the person recovered and is alive 20 years later, running a perfect life. So you have to be very careful when Ramosha makes the statement. It's with the situation that the prognosis is quite clear. Yes, doctor.
So the case that you started off with Rabbi Lau
Yes.
and the ALS,
Yes.
he didn't want to.
Be put on a respirator.
So what happened?
Rabbi Lau, based on guidance he received from great rabbinic authorities, the patient, and it reached courts in Tel Aviv, was not put on. His request was accepted, and as with an ALS patient, the systems, the lungs shut down. He was not put on the ventilator, and he died.
So, but then Rabbi Lau said this is not
Rabbi Lau,
precedent overall, that you have to take each case individually.
correct. What's his concern?
So do you know, subsequent to that, to that decision, whether this has recurred, this sort of problem? What kind of decision was handed down?
In general, all decisions since then, with similar cases, that it is quoted. The reason I was quoting Rabbi Lau, he of course was not successful with his statement that no one should ever follow, because it becomes the case that everyone quotes. But it is halacha. It is halacha. His concern was that it will be expanded. In other words, he walked into this scenario with trepidation, with an understanding that someone could apply it beyond the specific case. ALS patients are, halachically, are permissible, and this is a psak. The psak that he received to write that tshuva is quoted. Okay, so that's the reality.
You have a precedent.
It is, but I was trying to take from him more what was going through his mind as he's writing the tshuva, how serious this is, right? So he didn't. It became precedent, but at the same time, we have to. We recognize what halachic authorities struggle with when we are dealing with such issues. George first, yeah.
You keep talking about pain, you're implying physical pain. What about mental pain?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I'll get to that very, very soon. We'll get to that very, very, very soon. Okay, that's the next. Yes.
So, how far do we go for the patient, allowing him to make his decision? Like if we're talking about a patient who has his faculties, I mean, we allow him to decide how much agony he can take before it goes on?
In general, the patient makes a decision. The serious problem is that there are times that a patient reaches a point that they can no longer communicate. There are stories that reached courts in the United States of a patient that indicated to a wife that they want their life to come to an end by blinking when she said something. And you could blink here, blink there. It's not. It's a serious issue. The traditional cases mentioned is when the person says, "I can't take it anymore. Enough is enough. I don't want more treatment. I don't want any more treatment. Let nature, let God who gave the soul take my soul in peace." That is the traditional case they are talking about. Then we have to ask the question: what about if the patient himself cannot deal with the issue and it falls upon family members? So that's something that we'll get to very soon as well. Yes.
I don't know if it's taking you off track, but you gave the example of you and another Rav who asked the Shaila of a Gadol.
Right. A Shaila of a senior rabbi.
Of a senior rabbi. I thought when you ask a Shaila, you have to follow the Psak.
If you're a rabbi, you don't have to. How was that? Put it this way. Let's. The way you could view it is, the rabbi, without doubt, was a senior rabbi. My colleague there was a serious Talmid Chacham, right? I'm a rabbi as well. There were three of us, one on the phone. Two of us who were present, sensed otherwise, and we had a psak. In other words, this happened many, many years ago, and I look back and I realized that we simply did the right thing. And every once in a while, we made a t'nai, the two of us, that we're never going to share it. So I covered enough information that if he ever happens, that if Reb Shai ever sees the video, I could still say that I stuck to what I promised, that we'll never talk about it. But the reality is we had no choice. It was something that the psak was simply off. What are we supposed to do? So if you're, if we had no choice. It was a very painful, it was a very traumatic experience for us, and for many, many reasons. Yes,
Rabbi, you mentioned that you should not withhold food, but in palliative care in hospitals, they don't feed the patient.
depends on what state. Towards the end, they give ice chips, but that's because the body is shutting down already. You don't withhold food to bring the body to a state where it's going to shut down. And in the United States, they had cases of getting a court order not to feed, and the person lived on for 46 days in a state of a coma, and then they died from starvation. That's what happened in the United States. So in such a case, before the body is shutting down, you give food. When the system is shutting down in palliative care in the later stages, obviously you don't feed the person that's dying in the later stages, but you do give them to whatever they need to be comfortable, right? From morphine to ice chips or whatever, the menthol swabs that are given, that is what is given there. Yes?
In reality, you're dealing with the patient, you're dealing with the physician, you're dealing with the rabbi. So you have three people involved. And forget about the family, because... So what, in reality, who has the final word?
Okay. So if we are dealing with a patient that is able to, who has clarity, they had in the United States in the early 1990s what was known as the Palliative Care and Information Act. I think it was 1991. So the Palliative Care and Information Act really placed the weight on the patient. When in the 1960s, there's no such thing as asking the patient. Doctor knows best. By 1990 already, due to this Palliative Care Act, the hospitals, if they want to receive federal funding, they have the responsibility of informing a patient of the fact that they have the right to make decisions. There's some danger there as well, right? And this led to challenges that we face today. But to answer your question, it is the patient who makes the decision where the patient is capable of making such a decision. Now, to deal with just one issue, George wants to know, what about, you called it emotional or mental pain? So there are situations of, we know that human dignity is quite significant. We know very well that a person is willing to go through tremendous discomfort for their dignity. We know as well, for many of us, to know that a person, lo aleinu, is laying there in a coma state, and that their most basic, that their functions that they for years were done in private have to be taken care of by others. It's an end to human dignity, and that is what we could call mental pain. How much does halacha recognize mental pain? In other words, we all agree that if a person is physically in pain, medical treatments can be withheld, antibiotics can be withheld. What if it's a person that's in a coma? And the person made it very clear to family members, I don't want to die like that. I don't want people to have to go out and take care of these needs. My dignity, for me, the pain of not having a dignified life is as great as physical pain. I don't find poskim addressing it. I think that within the next few years, they will be addressing it. Now, I'll share with you a shaila. There's a specific woman of a family I'm very close to, and she had dementia, and she was eating some fruit. She choked. She's in a coma.